Good evening, Valeriy Viktorovich.
Good evening.
Good evening, dear viewers, listeners, and guests in the studio. Today is March 16th, 2020. It is clear what question will be the first. I think our viewers and listeners have already guessed it. Reading the question from Artyom, the coronavirus epidemic looks like a grandiose show. News about thousands of diseased and dead don't leave TV screens. At the same time, there are no real people hospitalized with this diagnosis and who would put selfies from hospitals in social networks. There are no such selfies. The diagnosis, coronavirus, can be legitimately issued only by a few laboratories in the world, accredited by the World Health Organization. Merkel said at first that 60–70% of German citizens would get sick, but she doesn't undertake any serious measures, except bits of advice on hand-washing and avoiding mass gathering. Who organized this burlesque? Who will benefit from it? China seems to control this coronavirus already, but the whole world is in a panic. What is happening in reality?
The question is put correctly in his assessment of the coronavirus situation. It is a grandiose spectacle. It is a worldwide hoax. It just is. It is a mystification in every sense, because now it is still unclear what a coronavirus is and what it does. China is keeping its silence in this regard. Every country works with some specific mutation. What is happening and how it is happening is still very unclear. Moreover, some countries use one diagnostic method, other countries use another one. Third countries don't even know about worldwide coronavirus pandemic. While in fourth countries, people are becoming insane from the horror around the pandemic. In principle, the coronavirus topic could already be closed, because we said from the very beginning that the coronavirus saga had two aspects. Firstly, economic, and secondly, a social one. In the economic aspect, it is envisaged to destroy unsecured assets with consecutive deflation of the inflationary bubble, putting pressure on the economy. In the social aspect, to reform state governance and interstate relations in such a way that it would be possible to achieve full control of society and create the center of governance concentration out of China. It seems to be that there is nothing else to talk about. Mass media is full of information related to coronavirus, as if nothing else is happening. This is it, horror for the whole of humanity. But after having a sober look at coronavirus, it becomes clear that regular flu is more dangerous for people than this coronavirus, regardless of how they are spinning it. We have already mentioned that all this commotion aroused by the coronavirus is designed to create the center of governance concentration out of China, to go ahead with it. Why is that so? Because this coronavirus forced China to establish quarantine, execute many economic and social actions, and so on. Mass media is overwhelmed with such information on coronavirus. But as to lethality, it makes 4% if estimated, at maximum. Meantime, there is a situation connected with China. It is another disease, but the lethality of the latter is 100%. Have you heard anywhere about it? No. Where is it taking place? It takes place in Somalia, on the border with Ethiopia. One of the Chinese objects is located there. And suddenly, people in Ethiopia living nearby this object began to die. This time, for real, a sick person eventually dies. But is anybody concerned about it? Maybe somebody is talking about it. No. Why? First of all, everyone who is involved in this governance knows the cause of death of all these people. Only for the last 2 weeks there have been at least 2,000 deaths. If a person gets sick, he dies. There is a lot of hysteria on the news around China because of coronavirus. China is involved in Ethiopian epidemic too. Let's spread the news. Nope, everybody keeps their mouths shut. What interests are related to Ethiopia and Somalia? None, except one fact. Africa is in the exclusive zone of Chinese interests, where China conducts a huge number of projects. And there is silence. 100% death rate, but no one cares. That means that a certain interest exists related to coronavirus. And this worldwide hysteria about coronavirus is evidence that the whole affair is a governance tool which is used to achieve some goals. For that purpose, something new was taken in China to scare people. It doesn't matter that lethality due to coronavirus is insignificant, that in a neighboring province of China more people died from avian flu than worldwide from coronavirus. No one cares. The most important thing is to scare people with something new. Thus, participation of all mass media outlets and all states in the coronavirus hysteria show one simple thing. It is a spectacle aimed at the reformation of all governing frameworks in the world. And not playing in this spectacle is punishable by death. A person would just get sick with coronavirus and die. That is why, one way or another, all heads of states, all state governments are taking part in this show. It is a pre-planned spectacle. And the necessity of conducting the coronavirus show is mandated, in principle, by interests of both superstate governance and state governance of any country. What is it about? Besides deflating the inflationary bubble, social issues are being taken care of. What social issues? Political oafs, talking heads, and low politicians worldwide, with their thoughtless chatter and actions within the governance of entrusted objects, states, brought the world into a very serious catastrophic situation, which required a full-scale correction. So this is how it works. There was a growing permanent hysteria in the world, but suddenly a coronavirus appeared. And, for example, the climate change hysteria evaporated. Really, they were running out of places where to put this Greta Thunberg, and who else should applaud her? Where is the migrant crisis, which Turkey promised to arrange for Europe? Where are multiple mass media reports from the Turkish-Greek border? no reports. No one expresses any interest in it. Moreover, Turkey got the message that it could be just blocked as the focal point of coronavirus infection. Further still, even terrorist organizations, as we know it is a tool of conducting foreign policy through intelligence services of certain actual countries, such as ISIS, decided, no, we will stay away from coronavirus. We won't go to Europe. The quarantine needs to be observed. What was the biggest concern in the eve of the coronavirus saga? It was the expectation of war. The system of governance, even if not of suprastate level, represented by the global predictor, but of suprastate level represented by the US country elite and the United States in principle, had more or less been ready for the war by 2014. And in 2014 the war could really happen. The fresh Gleiwitz took place. MH17 was shot down. But political oaths and all sorts of politicians didn't even notice it. Nevertheless, afterwards, they really spun off this military hysteria to such a degree that it was enough to strike a match, and that would be it. This spark could start a war before we would know it. But such wars are unacceptable from the suprastate governance point of view, because governance can be executed only over real objects and processes, and accordingly, processes of such magnitude must be under control. There is no such thing as unguided chaos. If one lets chaos happen, then chaos stays until the systematization of processes occurs. Therefore, the global governance had to put this fire down. Look how this war hysteria was dealt with. It just calmed down at once. No more talks about a possible war. The European system is not ready for any war. For example, European military exercises are taking place in Eastern Europe now. American troops were supposed to arrive from the United States there, and transport ships were waiting for several days at sea to be unloaded. All those ships would be sunk during a real war. It shows that in principle the system of European countries is not ready for any war. Yes, they can strike, but they won't withstand retaliatory strike, and a payback strike will definitely come. There are many examples of the system's unreadiness for war, but people didn't understand. All speakers at different political talk shows, all politicians of Medvedev's or Zelensky's level of understanding, for them the most important thing is to serve the United States, and they don't care about anything else, wouldn't calm down. And here comes coronavirus. Everybody is facing problems. All countries are closing down, and no one cares about war anymore. What kind of war if the entire army is sick, if there is a risk that the army may die from an epidemic? In 1918, the war ended not because of the epidemic, but because the political goals were achieved. Same here. Political targets were defined, and only then manageable objects were manipulated. The only country which works in its interests within all this noise is Russia, because Putin is a subject of global politics. And accordingly, through his work in the global scenario, he works towards increasing the resource stability of Russia. One way or another, all those actions that are being undertaken within the framework of the coronavirus pandemic are objectively working towards an increase in the resource stability of Russia, especially in medicine. What is happening next? Look, Italy is a developed European country, but apparently it wasn't ready for coronavirus infection. One blow and country is done. The rest of the countries face the same fate. Prohibition of face masks export, medicines export, and so on. The issue of industry nationalization is being raised. In other words, the United States, with its industry having been transferred to China, cannot provide functioning of the state based on its resources by itself. The same situation is in other countries too. As a result, one witnesses the following chain of events. At first, China got a very bad press. Remember? China is unprepared. Everything is bad in China. And suddenly, quote-unquote unprepared China quickly, exemplary, fast, and effectively liquidated the pandemic within itself. Moreover, China, where everything is bad, started to help once well-off first world countries by providing medical supplies and physicians to those who used to teach China and preach to it. It wasn't just a scary story with no message, but the mass media gave a lot of information about China to European citizens. And now, when people are scared enough, they all will die, pandemic, China came out as a victor. But here, where seemingly everything is under control, European countries cannot handle this problem. Accordingly, the European public and the world public are asking themselves a question of how effective the existing form of statehood and a state is. What is this ineffective state for, if it cannot protect from some illness? Wouldn't it be better to rebuild all countries based on China's model? Because the social organization of China has proved its effectiveness for fighting such threats that the whole humanity faces. China is not a threat to the world, because instead of being selfish, China comes to the hotbed of infection and helps with medicines and physicians. In other words, the social organization of China is promoted to the fullest. The direction of changes for the whole world's politics, as well as for reformation of the internal life of all countries, is shown. When we were discussing a society of total control, Big Brother is watching you, it is all European business. 1984 was written in Great Britain, not by accident. Thus, China will use this fear, and all social forms of state organization will receive a new meaning, and accordingly, the world one way or another begins to shape up to Chinese principles. Remember, there were countries of Soviet bloc and non-aligned countries. Oh, we like how social issues are being solved in the Soviet Union. We choose socialist orientation. All countries were different, but the ideology was within a certain framework. Then Pax Americana won, and the world accepted American principles. Now Pax Americana has become obsolete, and there is a new era, which can be called the Chinese era. The new social model was promoted by scaring all people that if they don't accept such an effective model of defense from the threats to humanity, they can die. What is happening next? It is a multi-step spectacle. In governance, no action can happen without 2, 3, or more accompanying effects. That is why if some manager is considering only one aspect of a governing decision, it is an incompetent manager. If some action is undertaken, it will start a chain reaction, and that must be anticipated. Burlesque with coronavirus is a multi-aspect, multi-step spectacle. Look, what was done within the framework of creating the center of governance concentration out of China. An epidemic begins in China. Chinese state undertakes fast and decisive steps to solve the problem. This is how it should be done. The epidemic is defeated. But along the way, the Chinese put forward a certain condition for different quote-unquote small companies, such as Toyota. I have already said that all the rest, tourism or trading, even AliExpress, are grass on a battlefield. If one is destroyed on the way, another will grow, because it is a secondary field. But industry must be rebuilt on completely different technological basis. Who and how will manage industries? What subject of governance will conduct its control? Those are very serious questions. Beforehand, everybody was brought under the United States. Everybody was trying to connect to the United States. But since now the economy in China is sufficiently brought under state control, it doesn't mean that in some provinces, in some city, a new focal point of infection cannot occur. Why not? If the epidemic was present on Toyota plants, it can appear on plants of another company. There are no processes left without control. But what is the most important thing that happened? China quickly and efficiently established the order inside the country. China quickly and efficiently solved issues of economic governance. And accordingly, what is taking place right now? There is a worldwide hysteria. All stock exchanges are falling. But China, it is a safe harbor with clear rules. Even though the rules are new and were unacceptable before the epidemic, but today they are the only rules based on which one can plan the future of industries and overall the future of any economic processes. Accordingly, surrounded by troubled waters, China represents the only orderly territory which promises a normal life for the economy, any economic processes, any industrial processes. One who doesn't join China must blame himself. He can sink in those troubled waters. In fact, via coronavirus, the next stage of creating the governance concentration center out of China to replace former centers located in Great Britain and the United States is carried out. As a result of it, the real industries, like cotton wool production, will move to the United States, whereas the management of transnational companies' industrial processes will move from the United States to China. Because for those companies, this opportunity is provided here. But the United States, the most powerful country in the world, the superpower, doesn't pose resource stability to provide management over transnational companies' activity from its territory. This is the step taken. And everything moves along. One needs to understand, it is a global spectacle, a global spectacle. Play with the unknown. Could China share these virus strains with all laboratories which could start work on it? It could. But why doesn't it give it out to study? Why is China hiding it? To make everybody work from scratch, to lengthen the time. How do all movies portray plots like this? All countries come together. Best minds immediately start working, and the task is solved quickly and efficiently. In principle, that is how it is supposed to be done, because it is in essence the collective mindset of a global society. And such countries as the United States, Russia, France, Great Britain, and Germany can solve this problem quickly enough in their medical centers. But to be able to do that quickly, they have to work not with some unknown coronavirus. Go I don't know where, bring I don't know what, but with a definitive object. However, the show must go on long enough. By announced algorithm, this saga will continue one way or another till the summer before it ends. Regarding economic processes, some say crisis is not beneficial. It is beneficial. I repeat, it lets decrease inflationary pressure on the economy. It was hardly ever announced about the coronavirus epidemic, as analysts, economists declared that the world economy would lose at least $1 trillion. The coronavirus had just appeared, but it was already announced. Appetite comes with eating, and now they say, we will see how many trillions would be possible to write off. That is regarding China. The second country with the prominent coronavirus epidemic is Iran, also planned to be the center of governance concentration. In Iran, coronavirus helps to bring ideological uniformity in Iranian elite. Thus, one way or another in Iran also, even to a lesser degree than in China, but nevertheless, the task is being solved. Again, it is a brief version of events. It can be expanded. So many small facts, speculations, and so on. In other words, information pressure is being put on, which makes people really lose their minds. But we have only covered it very briefly.